Welcome to my channel. Today's story is about the revenge of two twin sisters whose inheritance a greedy stepmother wanted to take away.
My name is Anna. I'm 26 years old, and at the exact moment my stepmother, Diana Whitmore, was signing the final protocol transferring the controlling stake of my father's company to her trusted proxy, I was standing behind her. The room was silent, except for the scratching of a gold fountain pen on paper, a sound that reminded me of claws dragging across wood, steady, methodical, lethal. Diana finished, set the pen aside, lifted her head, and smiled at my father with the tender, warm smile that had once made his knees weak after Mum died. She didn't know that in 15 minutes, people with an arrest warrant would walk through that door. She didn't know that Julian Croft, her lover and right hand in every scheme, was already sitting in handcuffs at Heathrow because the woman he'd fallen for, the woman he himself had granted access to his encrypted cloud vault, didn't exist. And most important of all, she didn't know that I was not Rachel, that the real Rachel was standing 3 meters away from her, in the corner of the office, watching the scene of her own defeat with icy calm, and that I, Anna, her twin sister, had been entirely absent from Diana Whitmore's radar for the entire 18 months of her marriage to my father. But before I tell you what she said when she finally understood, and how our revenge unfolded, write in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what city are you from? I'm genuinely curious how far this story will travel. Now, from the beginning. It didn't start with Diana, and it didn't start with my father. It started with a single folder in a county records office in Manchester, a folder holding a death certificate. I was born 14 minutes before Rachel, in a small maternity unit on the outskirts of the city, and if not for a bureaucratic mistake, we would have grown up together like any normal twins. But the mistake happened. The nurse filling out the paperwork mixed up our birth records and registered me as stillborn. By the time my father discovered the error, 2 months had passed, and he made a decision that defined our entire lives. He didn't correct the record. His construction business was taking off. He owed a dangerous sum of money to people who wouldn't hesitate to use family as leverage, and he was terrified. He decided it would be safer if one of his daughters officially had no visible connection to him. I was given our mother's maiden name, Belle, and a legally impeccable identity, the orphaned daughter of a distant cousin adopted by my grandmother. But here is the crucial part. My grandmother didn't live in Britain. She lived in Switzerland, and within a year of my birth, I was sent to her in Zurich. I grew up there, went to school there, and later university, under the name Anna Bell, with Swiss residency, a fully legal paper trail, a Swiss-issued identity card, health insurance, bank accounts, everything. To the world, I was simply a British-Swiss dual citizen raised by her grandmother. I had a national insurance number from the UK side, but it was tied to my Bell identity, not to William Grant. My father and sister visited a few times a year, always discreetly, always under the radar. I knew I had a family. I also knew I must never appear in public as William Grant's daughter. We were like two halves of a broken mirror, reflecting each other but existing in different realities.
When Mom died, I was 15, Rachel's 16. Dad began, cautiously, to prepare the ground for my eventual return to England. But that sort of reunification, restoring a vanished twin to a public family, takes years of legal and reputational work. I stayed in Zurich, finished a master's degree in cybersecurity, and started a career. We communicated with Rachel over encrypted apps. Dad assured me that within a year or two I could come home openly. Then he met Diana. Diana Whitmore entered my father's world as a financial consultant. She worked for the bank that handled the company's accounts. Dad was only just surfacing from the long depression he'd sunk into after Mom died. He was vulnerable, lonely, and desperate for warmth. Diana read that instantly. She became support, care, a business partner. 6 months later, they were married at a country hotel in the Cotswolds. I wasn't there. To everyone, including the new Mrs. Grant, I was a non-entity. When Diana instructed a private investigator to run a background check on William Grant before the wedding, the report came back clean. One daughter, Rachel, no other children, no hidden financial threats. She never thought to look for a daughter registered as stillborn who was now living quietly in Switzerland under a different surname. Her fatal blind spot was believing that if she couldn't see a thing, it didn't exist. Rachel fed me every detail. At first, her accounts were cautious. Then they became alarming. Diana reshaped the house to suit herself, replaced domestic staff, changed the security team, pushed out the old company accountant who'd worked with Dad for 15 years. She introduced a promising investor, Julian Croft, early 40s, oily gaze, habit of standing too close. Rachel, reading law, tried to ask why company spending had rocketed and why Dad signed documents without reading them. Diana would smile and say, "Rachel, darling, you're so young. Why fill your head with dreary business?" Dad was only too glad to believe her. Diana was a master at building a cozy reality in which she was queen, and everyone else was either a grateful spectator or an obstacle to be eliminated. The first real suspicions took root in Rachel about a year after the wedding. Diana introduced Dad to Julian Croft, and Rachel noticed that every word Julian spoke was silently cleared with Diana first. She noticed something else, too. Whenever Dad was away, Diana and Julian met far more often than work could justify. One evening, Rachel spotted them in a restaurant in central London, tucked into a corner table, Diana laughing, her hand resting on his wrist. It wasn't a business lunch, it was a date. Rachel rang me that same night. We met in a rented flat in a commuter belt town, a small 2-bedroom where nobody knew us. She was pale, but calm. She said, "They're together, lovers, I saw them." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. But that's not the worst part. I've been digging through the company papers. Diana's run several payments through shell companies. She's siphoning assets out, Anna, little by little, so nobody notices."
I leaned back against the sagging sofa. Outside, the night city rumbled. In that stillness, I understood with sudden clarity. We were on the edge of a catastrophe. If Diana was a professional manipulator, possibly with a string of identical heists behind her, we weren't dealing with just an unfaithful wife. We were dealing with a predator who was methodically destroying our family. "We have to do something," I said. "Yes," Rachel lifted her eyes to mine, "but we don't have proof that would convince Dad. The payments can be explained away as an accountant's carelessness. The lover can be painted as a business associate. Diana will wriggle out of any accusation because Dad wants to believe her. He wants to so badly, Anna. He's so tired of being..." I leaned back against the sagging sofa. Outside, the night city rumbled. In that stillness, I understood with sudden clarity. We were on the edge of a catastrophe. If Diana was a professional manipulator, possibly with a string of identical heists behind her, we weren't dealing with just an unfaithful wife. We were dealing with a predator who was methodically destroying our family. "We have to do something," I said. "Yes," Rachel lifted her eyes to mine, "but we don't have proof that would convince Dad. The payments can be explained away as an accountant's carelessness. The lover can be painted as a business associate. Diana will wriggle out of any accusation because Dad wants to believe her. He wants to so badly, Anna. He's so tired of being alone." "Then we need undeniable proof. And we have one advantage." Rachel pushed her cup aside. "She doesn't know about you. You've been in Switzerland all these years. You're not in any of the UK searches she would have run. You can walk into this from the blind spot." And there, that night, on that sagging sofa in a rented flat, the plan that would govern the next 8 months of our lives was born. I need to say this up front. The plan wasn't an improvisation. We didn't count on luck. We didn't assume the villains were stupider than us. We started from the opposite assumption, that they were clever, experienced, and careful, and we built our plan not on fooling their defenses, but on making them open the door for us themselves. The key was that Diana, for all her thoroughness, genuinely believed she had everything under control. She'd vetted Dad before the wedding. We later learned she'd hired a private investigator and run every available database. But the searches were standard.
tax records, court judgments, property registrations. She was hunting for financial threats, not family secrets. The civil registry documents she requested showed only one child born to William Grant, Rachel. I was officially Annabelle, the daughter of a single mother who died years earlier, raised by her grandmother in Switzerland. The link between me and the Grant family was invisible to any database search because legally no such link existed. Any photos of our mother that might have raised questions were hidden away. Dad had put all the old albums into storage after Mom's death because they caused him too much pain, not out of secrecy. None of Diana's new acquaintances knew Rachel had a sister because Rachel herself had been trained since childhood not to talk about it. So Diana really had no idea I existed, and that wasn't her mistake. It was a feature of the reality circumstances created long before she arrived.
But secrecy alone wasn't enough. To get evidence, we had to penetrate the heart of the criminal scheme. We had to get close to Julian Croft. Rachel did reconnaissance through her contacts at the law firm where she was a trainee solicitor. What emerged was that Julian Croft had a long, dark history. His financial advisor's license had been suspended twice over suspicious transactions. His name cropped up in 2 divorce cases in which wealthy husbands lost fortunes, while their ex-wives suddenly turned out to own assets through chains of front companies. And in both cases, the same independent advisor was hovering in the background. As a cybersecurity specialist, I took professional interest. I dug deeper. The underbelly of the internet, which I knew thanks to my work, let me find something else. Julian was a paranoid. He collected information on everyone he dealt with. On a shadow forum frequented by people in his line of work, he once mentioned in passing that he kept a file on every client, just in case. A light bulb went on in my head. He has a file, I told Rachel at our next meeting, a digital archive with all the documents from every deal he's ever done. If we get access, we'll have everything. How do we get it? Rachel asked. You'll hand it to us himself, to me, or not exactly me. You're talking in riddles. I'm talking about creating a person he'll want to trust. I opened my laptop and showed her a draft social media profile. A woman called Laura, unconnected to our family, with a rich backstory, a real history he can verify, and this woman will become whatever he wants her to be. And how do we stop him recognizing her? You look like me, and he's met me. We've crossed paths at the office a few times. We're identical twins, same face, same mannerisms, same voice. That's the challenge. I can't just take off my glasses and let my hair down. That won't fool a professional. I need to become someone else, physically and vocally. I have 2 months. I'll work on it. And I did. First, the documentation. Through my IT contacts, I found a real woman willing to sell her genuine 6-year-old social media profile. She was 26, had lived at the opposite end of the country, and recently emigrated to Australia, losing all interest in her old life. The profile contained hundreds of organic posts, comments, tagged photos, impossible to fake convincingly. We agreed on a price, she handed over the login, and I began carefully reshaping the account. I never deleted old photographs. I added new ones that blended seamlessly, using images where the woman already slightly resembled me with makeup. At the same time, I did a thorough digital scrub, ensuring no reverse image search could link Laura to Rachel, and no mutual friends or location tags would create a trail back to the Grant family.
Second, the physical transformation. I spent weeks learning professional cosmetic contouring techniques, the kind used in film and theater, to reshape the apparent structure of my face. I used subtle, temporary dermal fillers to alter my jawline and cheekbones slightly, non-surgical changes that would fade within months and leave no permanent record. I swapped my glasses for colored contact lenses, lightening my eyes from brown to hazel. I bleached my hair to a shade Rachel would never wear, a cool ash blonde. I changed my posture, the way I walked, the way I tilted my head. Third, the voice. I worked with a voice coach over encrypted video calls, training myself to adopt a faint French-Swiss accent with a slightly lower pitch and slower cadence. By the end of those 2 months, when I looked in the mirror, I did not see Rachel. I saw Laura, a confident, slightly cynical woman with a continental inflection and an air of mystery. When the profile was ready and the physical work complete, even a professional background check would conclude that Laura was exactly who she claimed to be. Meanwhile, Rachel started performing the role of lightning rod. She became sharp, unmanageable, a problem. She was late to family dinners. She made barbed comments about Diana's spending. She deliberately dropped phrases that would convince our stepmother that Daddy's girl was becoming a threat. The climax was a public scene at Dad's office. Rachel arrived in the middle of the working day, with witnesses, secretaries, accountants, a couple of clients in reception, and staged a meltdown. She shouted that Diana was running the company into the ground, that Dad had gone blind, that as legal heir, she would not allow assets to be shifted God knows where. She flung a sheaf of papers onto the desk, smashed an expensive vase, a wedding anniversary present from Diana, and stormed out, slamming the glass so hard the glass rattled. Diana was stunned. She had never imagined that quiet, obedient Rachel was capable of such a performance. She immediately phoned Dad, painted the scene in vivid colors, added tears to her voice, and by evening, Dad rang Rachel demanding an explanation. Rachel explained, again at high volume, that she didn't trust that woman and intended to sue for her share of the inheritance. A week later, she instructed a solicitor, not from the firm she was training, but an outsider known for taking on high-profile cases. The solicitor filed a claim challenging the prenuptial agreement. The claim was deliberately flimsy, we knew that, but it created exactly what we needed, a huge, noisy, attention-grabbing conflict. Diana threw every resource into neutralizing it. Her lawyers drafted counterclaims. Her security team tracked Rachel's every move. Her attention was wholly and completely absorbed by the threat from her stepdaughter. And at that very moment, I, the second sister, the invisible one, walked into the game.
My first encounter with Julian Croft took place at a restaurant called The Velvet Room on a freezing November evening. I picked the place deliberately. Through my channels, I knew he dined there on Thursdays. I arrived early, took a seat at the bar, ordered a cocktail, and waited. I wore a black, fitted dress, high heels, my ash blonde hair in soft waves, and makeup that further sculpted my altered features, bold lips, contouring, smoky eyes. I looked nothing like Rachel, the shy business heiress in an office suit. I looked like a woman who'd come to a restaurant to enjoy herself and was open to meeting an interesting man. Julian appeared about half an hour later. He sat at his usual table, ordered, opened the Financial Times. I didn't rush. I let him finish his starter, have a second glass of Burgundy, relax. Then, as he passed the bar on his way to the gents, I accidentally collided with him, and my clutch bag fell to the floor. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said with my new voice, slightly husky, carrying that Swiss lilt. I bent down at the same moment he did. We nearly bumped foreheads. "No harm done." He picked up the clutch, handed it to me, and let his gaze linger on my face for a second. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes, but blurred, the way someone tries to place an acquaintance. "Forgive me, have we met before? Your face seems familiar." "I don't think so." I smiled wider. "I've only been in London a couple of months. I'm based in Zurich normally, but if we had met before, I would have remembered you." It worked. Julian filed that vague sense of familiarity somewhere at the edge of his consciousness, exactly where it wasn't dangerous. Later, when we were sitting at the same table, talking, I noticed him studying my face from time to time, then looking away. His brain kept trying to square me with Rachel, but the context was too different, the makeup and subtle facial changes too transformative. My voice and accent entirely unlike Rachel's crisp English. My manner, quick, sharp, slightly cynical, utterly unlike the quiet girl he'd glimpsed in an office. Eventually, his brain decided the resemblance was a coincidence and relaxed.
I also knew from my technical preparations that if he ran a basic background check on Laura, and he absolutely would, her profile would hold up. 6 years of real history, real friends, real check-ins, all predating my involvement. She was a real person who had simply moved on to a new life in Australia, and I had stepped into her digital skin. Over the next 2 months, I became a regular part of Julian's life. We dined out, took a couple of trips to the coast. I played Laura, a woman slightly disillusioned with life, looking for a man with means and not hiding it. Laura was cynical but not cruel, greedy but not stupid. She listened to Julian attentively, asked the right questions, laughed at his jokes, and never disagreed. Julian melted. He started opening up, first about petty annoyances, then about his work with Diana, then about how tired he was of playing second fiddle to a woman who claimed the lion's share of the rewards for their joint labor. He complained that Diana undervalued him, that she thought only of herself, that she could drop him at any moment.
"That's why I keep everything," he said one night. We were at his flat after dinner. He was drinking scotch, I was sipping water. Every invoice, every agreement, every conversation. In the cloud. The cloud? I raised an eyebrow. What if someone hacks it? Hack it? He smirked smugly. I use a service with military-grade encryption, 2-factor authentication, voice and fingerprint biometrics, plus it's tied to my device's serial number. Even if someone got my password, without my phone, my thumbprint, and my voice, they'd never get in. To get all 3 at once, you'd have to be me. I said nothing. I realized the situation was trickier than we'd thought. Simply copying files off his laptop wouldn't work. He never left it unlocked, and he certainly wouldn't give a bystander access to the vault. The man really was a paranoid and a professional in his field. But every system has a weak point. I understood what his was when he started talking about trusted users. He said the cloud service allowed you to add a trusted user. It was a standard feature for business accounts. The owner could grant another person access with defined permissions. Julian admitted he'd once added a trusted user before, an ex-girlfriend he'd worked a scheme with, but had revoked her access after they split. "And now?" I asked. "Is there anyone you trust that much?" "Not currently," he looked at me with a long, searching gaze. "But maybe soon there will be." In that moment, I knew. He'd taken the bait. He was already projecting his desires and fantasies onto me. If I played my cards right, he'd add me himself. I just needed to create the right motivation. We built that motivation, together, Rachel and I. While I worked on Julian, Rachel pushed Diana to breaking point. Her legal claim gained traction. Hearings were adjourned and rescheduled, but the noise was enormous. Rachel's solicitor gave an interview to a financial broadsheet hinting that Diana's marriage to William Grant might be declared voidable in light of new evidence. We didn't have evidence, but the paper didn't care. Diana was incandescent. She demanded Julian step up the pressure on Rachel, dig up dirt, discredit her. Julian scurried, tried to find skeletons in Rachel's closet, but all his efforts came to nothing. Rachel was behaving impeccably, and she had no skeletons. And the more Julian fretted, the more he craved an escape. I was that escape. One evening, after a particularly brutal day, Rachel's hearing had been postponed yet again, and Diana had screamed at Julian down the phone. He sat across from me, defeated and angry. "She's draining me," he said. "She thinks I'm her errand boy, and I'm the one doing the hard graft. I balance the numbers, I clean the books, I draft the contracts. All she does is smile and sign."
"Then why do you put up with it?" I asked softly, holding his eyes. "Because the money at stake is enormous. If this works, I'll never work for anyone again, and neither will you." He took my hand. "I want you to come with me to Zurich. When it's time to finalize the transfer, I want you beside me." "You mean it?" "Absolutely. We'll pull the final stage, and that's it. Diana gets her cut, I get mine, and you and I will disappear somewhere far away." I pretended to hesitate. Then I said, Julian, you say beautiful words, but I've been burned before. My ex-husband said beautiful words too, and where is he now? I was left with nothing. If you really want me with you, I need a guarantee that you won't vanish the moment the money hits. What sort of guarantee? He frowned. Give me access to your cloud, I said calmly. Read only. I want to see the documents for the current deal, so I know you're not stringing me along. I won't copy anything. You can set the permissions. Just let me see what you're doing. It would be a gesture of trust. And without trust, Julian, there's no future for us. I struck exactly the right nerve. Julian was smarting after his row with Diana, feeling undervalued, humiliated, and here I was, understanding, caring, offering a future together, asking merely for a token of trust. It wasn't a demand, it was an invitation to become closer. His paranoia, which in ordinary circumstances would have screamed alarms, stayed silent, because paranoia is a defense against enemies, and I was no enemy. I was his only ally. All right, he said after a pause. I'll add you. Read only, no download or edit rights, and promise me you won't let me down. I won't, I squeezed his hand. The next day, in his flat, he opened the cloud vault on his laptop in front of me. I watched him enter his password, pass the fingerprint scan, speak the voice command. Then he went into access settings and entered my email as a trusted user. The one thing he didn't do was untick the default download permission. He was distracted, still emotionally raw from the fight with Diana, his mind on the future, not on the fine print. He clicked confirm and my phone pinged with the access notification. There, he said, leaning back. Now you see what I see. Satisfied? Very, I smiled and kissed his cheek. That same evening, once he'd left for a meeting with Diana, I opened the vault on my own laptop. What I found exceeded our darkest expectations. It wasn't just a collection of financial documents. It was an encyclopedia of betrayal. Hundreds of files, dozens of folders labeled by year, project, and victim, scanned contracts with shell companies, bank transfer receipts, fake invoices, forged signatures, audio recordings of conversations Julian had held with Diana and third parties. He'd been secretly taping everything for years. Intimate photos and videos confirming the affair. But the most horrifying thing was in a folder marked Current Project. Inside was a plan that showed Diana intended, after draining the assets, to frame my father for tax fraud. She was going to backdate several transactions to make them look like criminal acts committed personally by William Grant. This meant Dad wasn't just facing the loss of his business, he was facing prison.
Methodically, folder by folder, I copied every file onto an encrypted external hard drive. It took 40 minutes. I sat in that half-empty flat, staring at the screen, feeling a cold stone growing in my chest. It wasn't rage, it wasn't grief, it was that sensation that precedes inevitability, when you understand the blow has already been struck and all that remains is to choose the moment it lands. I met Rachel the same night. We sat in our rented flat, spread the printouts across the table, and Rachel examined them with a granite face. They weren't just going to rob him, she said at last. They were going to destroy him. Yes, but now we can stop them. Stop isn't the right word, Rachel raised her eyes. They won't stop if we simply hand the material to the police. They'll try to flee, destroy evidence, pressure Dad. We have one shot, Anna. We must strike so both of them have no time to react, simultaneously. Julian at the airport, Diana at the office, and we must do it when they're completely convinced they've won. Then we wait for the 8th of March, I said, the day Julian is due to fly to Zurich. Yes, but first we have to talk to Dad. The conversation with Dad was scheduled for the 7th of March. We prepared for it with special care because we knew that whether he believed us would determine everything. If Dad couldn't accept the truth, if he panicked, or worse, phoned Diana to sort things out, we would collapse and Diana would have time to cover her tracks.
We arrived at the house at 9 in the evening, while Diana was out meeting a notary about the final documents. Dad was in his study, reading. Seeing the two of us together, really together, for the first time in a while, he removed his glasses and frowned. "Girls, is something wrong? Anna, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be in England." "I am supposed to, Dad," I interrupted, closing the study door. "What we're about to tell you will be very hard to hear, but it's the truth, and we have all the evidence. Please, just listen. Don't interrupt. When we've finished, you decide what to do." Dad's gaze moved from me to Rachel and back. He could see we weren't joking. He saw the printouts in our hands, and slowly he nodded, set his book aside, and prepared to listen. We talked for nearly 2 hours. We began with Rachel overhearing a suspicious conversation at the office a year ago, how we'd started digging, how we'd discovered the link between Diana and Julian, how I, using my gift of invisibility and my Swiss base, had inserted myself into the lover's circle, how I'd disguised myself, not just with makeup, but with temporary cosmetic adjustments and a new accent, so he would never see Rachel in my face. I also explained my legal identity. I grew up as Anna Bell, Dad.
I had a passport, a Swiss residence permit, a full paper trail. I just wasn't your daughter on paper. That's how I got a degree, a job, a life, and how I stayed invisible to everyone who searched for your children. We showed him folder after folder, scanned contracts, transcripts of conversations, asset stripping diagrams, the plan to frame him for tax evasion, photographs of Diana with Julian in hotels and restaurants, photographs Julian himself had taken and kept as mementos. As we spoke, our father's face changed. Its color drained, his eyes grew deeper. A furrow I'd never seen before etched into his brow. He didn't cry. He sat very straight, gripping the armrests, and listened without interruption, asking only once that I repeat the final figure, the sum they intended to move offshore. When we finished, silence filled the room. The clock on the mantelpiece counted the seconds. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Wind rattled the bare branches of the old apple tree outside. Dad stared at the documents spread on the desk, then at us, then back at the documents. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded unnaturally hollow. "I built this company from nothing. I survived the recession, 2 crashes, the loss of your mother. I thought I'd learn to read people. And all this time I was sleeping next to a woman who planned to destroy me and send me to prison." "Dad," Rachel leaned forward. "No," he raised a hand. "Don't pity me. The fault is mine. I wanted someone to take the burden I'd been carrying for 20 years. I was so tired, girls, so tired of being strong. And when she appeared, beautiful, clever, supposedly caring, I simply surrendered. I let her do whatever she pleased so long as I didn't have to face my exhaustion alone. And if it weren't for you..." He stopped, swallowed, looked at us with a gaze that held such a mixture of pain and gratitude that my heart clenched. "I am proud of you. You did what I couldn't. You protected this family. Now tell me what we do tomorrow." I laid out the plan. Before coming to Dad, I had already contacted a former lecturer of mine from my Zurich University, a cybersecurity expert who now worked with the UK's National Crime Agency. He helped frame the initial complaint so the investigation could be opened immediately. Crucially, the material I had copied from Julian's vault was treated only as intelligence to establish probable cause. The NCA then obtained an independent, lawful warrant to access Julian's cloud vault directly from the service provider. So by the time the arrests happened, the incriminating files were already in law enforcement's hands via a completely clean evidentiary chain. Diana's lawyers would never be able to argue in court that the evidence was tainted fruit because the official case did not rely on my access at all. I remained a ghost.
Julian would be arrested at Heathrow while trying to leave the country on a false passport. Diana at the office when she arrived to sign the final papers. "And what do I do?" Dad asked. Rachel said, "Be there. Sit in that office and look her in the eye. You need to watch her fall. It matters. It will be your liberation." Dad nodded. We hugged, the 3 of us together for the first time in many years, and went our separate ways. Rachel drove home. I went back to the rented flat to prepare the final files for the NCA. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in front of my computer, checking and rechecking everything I'd copied, and thought about the strange way life works. For 21 years, I had been invisible. For 21 years, I had been a shadow, a ghost, a girl who officially wasn't connected to her own father. And now that very invisibility had become our greatest weapon. On the 8th of March, at 10 in the morning, Julian Croft stood at the check-in desk at Heathrow Terminal 5, glancing nervously at his watch. Laura was nowhere. He'd called her 3 times already, each time reaching voicemail. His luggage was packed, his ticket to Zurich was in his jacket pocket, and the laptop under his arm held all the data to finalize the asset transfer. He wasn't panicking yet. He assumed I was running late, stuck in traffic, about to appear breathless with a smile. But instead of me, 2 plainclothes officers from the NCA appeared. They approached from either side, showed a warrant for his arrest and seizure of electronic devices, and asked him to come with them. "You've got no right," Julian protested. "I haven't done anything." "You are suspected of conspiracy to defraud and money laundering involving a high-value property transfer from Grant Holdings," one of the officers read in a level voice. "The rest will be explained to you at the station. The laptop, please. Hand it over." He handed it over. He was so stunned he didn't even try to resist or shout. He just stood there, mouth open, the realization slowly dawning. The realization that Laura wasn't coming, that the cloud vault he'd placed such faith in wasn't going to save him, that the woman to whom he'd handed the keys was not who she had claimed to be. At the same moment, across the city, in the offices of Grant Holdings, Diana Whitmore was preparing for her final triumph. She arrived at 9 as usual. She wore an immaculate gray suit, her hair pinned perfectly, her lips wearing that victor's smile. Her secretary, a young woman we'd planted, handed her the folder with the final papers, the protocol transferring account control to her designated proxy. Diana skimmed the pages, gave a satisfied nod, and walked into my father's office. Dad was sitting behind his desk. He looked tired but calm, far calmer than usual. Diana didn't register it. She sat opposite, spread out the documents, and began in her honeyed voice. "Will, darling, these are the last papers for the tax restructuring. Remember I told you? Sign here, here, and here. Pure formality, but the bank won't complete the transaction without it." Dad slowly shifted his gaze from the papers to her and said, "Diana, doesn't it strike you as odd that a company which operated perfectly well for 20 years without offshore structures suddenly needs its assets shifted to Switzerland right now?" Diana's brow creased for a split second, but the smile snapped back into place. "It's standard practice, Will. I explained all this. The new regulations, post-Brexit, we need to diversify risk." "I've read," Dad cut across. "I've read every document you've put in front of me for the past year. All of them, 540 pages. And do you know what I've understood? That you've been siphoning money since the first day of our marriage. That you backdated several transactions deliberately to frame me. That you planned to leave me penniless and facing criminal charges. And that you're sleeping with Julian Croft." Diana's face slid off her face. For a second, something sharp and vicious flared in her eyes. The real creature she kept so carefully hidden behind the mask. But she recovered fast. "Will, sweetheart, who told you this? Rachel? Your hysterical daughter who spent 6 months trying to wreck our marriage? You believe her over me?" "I believe facts." Dad opened a desk drawer and produced the folder Rachel and I had prepared. "It's all here. Your contracts, your transfers, your recordings with Julian, your plan to set me up. Would you like to look?" Diana didn't take the folder. She stared at Dad and her face slowly changed. The sweetness drained away, uncovering a cold, calculating fury. She knew she'd lost, but she didn't yet know how badly. "Where did you get this? Julian? Did Julian leak this to you?" "No," I said, stepping out of the corner of the office where I had been standing. "Julian didn't leak. He had help." Diana jerked around at the sound of my voice. She saw me and froze. Her pupils dilated. She looked at me, then swung her head towards the office door, through which Rachel, the real Rachel, was walking in that moment in her business suit, hair scraped back, glasses on. "You," Diana breathed, her gaze flicking from me to Rachel and back. "You. Twins," Rachel finished. "My name is Rachel, and this is Anna, my sister, whose existence you were unaware of because we hid her many years ago. She grew up in Switzerland under the name Anna Bell, a perfectly legal, fully documented identity, just with no visible tie to this family. And while you were throwing every resource into fighting me, Anna walked into your rear lines and got everything we needed." "This isn't possible." Diana had gone pale. "I checked the records. William has one daughter. I saw the birth certificate." "You saw what was on the surface, Diana. You're a professional, but your mistake was believing you were cleverer than everyone else. You assumed that if you couldn't see something, it didn't exist. But that's not true. I exist, and I destroyed your plan."
At that moment, the police entered the office. Diana glanced back at them, and I saw her spine, always so straight, break. She sagged, her shoulders dropped, and the gold fountain pen she'd been holding all this time fell from her hand, the very pen she was meant to sign her triumph with. It rolled across the floor and stopped at Dad's feet. "Diana Whitmore," the senior officer began, "you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to defraud, attempted theft of company assets, and forgery. Please come with us." Diana didn't struggle. She rose slowly, still staring at the two of us, and in her gaze was something I'd never seen in anyone before, a mixture of hatred, bewilderment, and almost scientific curiosity, as if she, a seasoned predator, had encountered two beings she could not catalog. "Who are you?" she asked me. "I don't understand. Who are you?" "I'm the thing you didn't factor into your calculations. You lost not because you were stupid. You lost because you never allowed for the invisible, and the invisible, as you now know, can be deadly." They led her out. Rachel stood beside Dad, her hand on his shoulder, watching the door close on the woman who had almost destroyed our lives. Dad sat motionless, but the pain in his eyes was gone. Something new was there. Perhaps relief, perhaps simply peace. The following months were hard. Trials, depositions, hearings. Julian, staring at the prospect of a long custodial sentence, made a deal with the Crown Prosecution Service and testified against Diana. He revealed everything, their schemes stretching back a decade, including 2 previous episodes with other victims. Diana tried to wriggle, hired top solicitors, but the evidence from the cloud vault was irrefutable, and because the NCA had obtained a separate warrant to seize the data directly from the service provider, her lawyers couldn't argue the evidence was tainted. The court annulled the prenuptial agreement, restored all assets to my father, and sentenced Diana to 4.5 years imprisonment. Julian received a 2-year suspended sentence and a lifetime ban from the financial services industry. Both vanished from our lives forever. But the real changes happened inside the family. The ordeal changed Dad. He became tougher with outsiders and warmer with us. He never again signed a document without reading it. He reinstated the old company accountant, rebuilt his team, and put in place a system where no transaction passed without triple verification. Rachel passed her bar exams and took over as head of the company's legal department. I was officially returned to the family, through the courts, through the restoration of my documents, through a long process Dad set in motion the very day Diana was led out of his office. Now, I don't hide. I sit in the same office, work for the same company, and carry the same surname. I often think about that day, how Diana was tracing her signature in gold ink, believing she was winning, how Dad sat opposite, stone-faced, waiting for the end,
how Rachel and I stood on opposite sides of the room, two halves of one whole, two blades of one sword that struck down an enemy without making a sound. Revenge isn't a scream. Revenge is the silence in which a person who believed too loudly in their own invincibility drowns. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have built such an intricate, dangerous operation to protect someone you love? Or would you have chosen a more direct path? And what do you think is more terrifying for a predator, a frontal assault, or a blow from a direction whose very existence they never suspected? Write in the comments. The way I see it, this story isn't really about revenge. It's about turning a disadvantage into an advantage. For 20 years, nobody noticed me. Nobody looked for me. Nobody factored me in. Nobody included me in their calculations. And in the end, that's what destroyed the people who thought they'd accounted for everything. Sometimes invisibility isn't a curse. Sometimes invisibility is a superpower. Rachel and I proved it.